Hello everyone, Victor here. In this tutorial we are going to learn how to rig a claw machine like this one, and then we will place some keyframes to animate it. We will also learn some tricks with a grade free add-on to give more realism to the movements. So let's start. So here in Blender 2.90 we have this claw assembly, and here we have a box, a kind of a little electric box, a cable for the claw. We have the car, I have called it car for this moving part over here. We have the claw itself, these moving bars and these static bars. So let's start with the rigging. And before doing anything and creating any armature, the first I'm gonna do is check that I have in all my objects the location, rotation and scale applied. And here I have it, but to be more sure I'm going to select everything with A. Let me enable the shortcuts here. There we go. So I select everything and Control A, apply all transfer. So now we have in all the objects the location, rotation and scale applied, and we can start with the rigging. So I'm gonna press Shift and C to center the 3D cursor at the world origin, and I'm gonna press Shift A, Armature single bone. So now we have this giant bone here. I'm gonna go to Viewport Display and display as B bone, and I'm gonna show also the names and axes of the bones. And now in edit mode, if I press tab, I go to edit mode as you do with the normal objects. So now I select this bone and I scale it down, but notice what we are doing is scaling the bone in its center. So what I'm gonna do is press the period key and select the pivot point at the 3D cursor. And now if I scale it, I'm gonna scale it like this. So this will be like the root or the main bone. So I'm gonna go here at the bone properties and call it root main, for example. And now I'm gonna press Ctrl Shift S to make this bone more thinner. Now let's analyze a little bit this assembly. We have these moving bars, which moves obviously in this direction only. And then we have this car. I call it car because it has 4 wheels inside, so why not? So this car moves in the y-axis in this case and in the x-axis, right? So we need 2 bones here for each of these elements. So I'm gonna press 3 to go to the right view in my case and go to the X-ray mode, and I'm gonna duplicate this bone with Shift and D and move it in the Z axis over here. I'm gonna press period and change again the pivot point to the bounding box center, and I'm gonna scale it right over here, and I'm gonna call it moving bar. And now we have 2 different bones. This one is not connected with this one. In fact, if I go to the pose mode, I move this root, the moving bars are not moving. So what I can do is go to edit mode, select these moving bars, select with Shift the root main and press Ctrl P and keep offset. If I go to the pose mode and I move the root main, the moving bars will be moving along. And that's what we want. Now I'm going to create another bone for this car assembly here, which is this object over here. So now I'm gonna press again Shift D and move it a little bit down over here in the Z axis. I'm gonna call it this car, and I'm going to scale it a little bit and then press again Ctrl Alt S to make it a little bit thicker, something over here. And now as we duplicated this moving bars bone, this car bone is going to be parented to the root main, and we want instead to be parented with the moving bar. So here in the bone properties, I'm going to delete this parent relation. Now it's independent of the other bones, and I'm going to select with Shift the moving bars and press again Ctrl P and keep offset. As you can see, I'm jumping over the pose mode and the object mode by selecting the armature or one object, and this is because I have here in the edit tab the lock object modes disabled. So I can jump to the pose mode and to the object mode really quickly. Let's create now the bones for the claw, and what I'm going to do is select here at the claw object. I'm going to select this loop and Shift S, cursor to selected. And now if I return to my armature in edit mode and going to the right view and press Shift A, I'm going to be creating a new bone with any relation with others, but inside of course of the actual armature. So again, I'm gonna scale it, but not in the bounding box center. I'm going to change the pivot point to 3D cursor and scale it down. I'm going to squish it with Ctrl Alt S, maybe go to the X-ray mode to see better what we are doing. And then I'm going to rotate 180 degrees to have the bone pointing down. I'm gonna move this bone right about over here, and I'm gonna call this bone claw root. And now we are going to create the bones for these arms, and for this we need the bone centered as this joint. So what I can do is go to object mode and select this object, go to edit mode, and I'm going to select these two vertices and press Shift S and cursor to select it. And now back into the armature in edit mode. If I press again Shift A, I'm going to create a bone. I'm going to scale it from the 3D cursor again, scale it down like this. I'm going to press Ctrl Alt S, and now we need this point right in the center of this joint. So again, in the edit mode of the object, I'm going to select these two vertices, make sure you have both selected, and Shift S cursor to select it. And back into the edit mode of the armature, I can select this end point of the bone and Shift S selection to cursor. I'm gonna squish it a little bit more with Ctrl Alt S, something over here. Now I'm gonna call this bone, for example, claw arm up. And now remember, we have created two bones, but they are not connected right now. So if I go to pose mode again and move this car, the claw is not moving. And again, to parent these two bones, I'm going to select this claw root and Shift select the car, Ctrl P and keep offset. And the same with the claw arm up. Select this bone and then the root, and Ctrl P, make parent and keep offset. So now in pose mode, if we rotate for example this claw, I'm rotating also the claw arms, and if I rotate the car, I'm rotating the entire claw. And these are the kind of checks you have to do along with the rigging process. So let's continue with the creation of the bones. I'm gonna extrude another bone over here, and again go to the object mode, select this object and go to edit mode and select these two vertices, Shift S, cursor to select it, and the same as before, Shift S, selection to cursor. Let's change the name of this bone. I'm gonna call it claw arm down. And now we need another extra bone here, and this will be the bone that goes up and down along with the shaft. In this way it can rotate along these two joints, and this is what makes the claw open and close. I can rename this bone claw arm IK, and now we need another bone for the actual shaft. This shaft goes just up and down, and this is what makes everything work. So in edit mode here in the armature, I'm going to select this end point of this bone and press Shift S, cursor to select it, and Shift A and create a new bone. I'm gonna scale it, but not in this way. I'm gonna scale it from the 3D cursor, scale it down, squish it a little bit with Ctrl Alt S, rotate it 180 degrees. I'm gonna move this bone over here, and with this point selected, I'm gonna move it up just over there and squish it a little bit more over here. And I'm gonna call this bone claw shaft. There we go. And again, this bone is not parented to anything, and in this case this shaft is parented with the claw root. So with this claw shaft bone selected, I'm going to select with Shift the claw root and Ctrl P and keep offset. And we can also check inverse kinematic behaviors if we select, for example, this bone and go to Tool and select Auto IK. And this is like an automatic inverse kinematic, and this is really useful to see how it's working the rigging. So right click to release at the same position, and I'm going to disable the auto IK. And now it's time to add the actual object to the armature. And since we have some objects here, for example, if I select this object and go to edit mode, go to X-ray, as you can see we have some elements which are in the same object but are actually separated meshes. So the best way to assign an armature for this kind of objects is with empty groups. So let's start, for example, with this electric box here. So I select the box, select the armature with Shift and Control P, and set parent to armature with empty groups. So now if we go to the object data properties, we will have here a vertex group created for each bone that we made before. So this object, for example, to clean up a little bit this information, we know that this object is going to be parented only with the root main. So what we can do is go to these vertex groups and delete all these vertex groups that we don't need. So in this case we only need the root main. And now in edit mode in this object I'm going to select with A all these vertices and click on assign. And now if I go to pose mode on the armature and I move this root, as you can see we are moving this object with this bone. But if I move any other bone, for example the car, this object is not going to move because it doesn't have any vertex information. So that's what we have to do with all these elements. For example, this object here, it's really easy because we have to again shift and select the armature, shift Control P and parent with empty groups. And in this case, again, we only need the moving bars bone to move this object. So I'm going to the vertex groups and I'm going to delete all these vertex groups that we don't need. Now I'm going to edit mode, select everything and assign. Let's check it out. The pose mode, I'm going to move the moving bars and everything okay. So let's apply the same principle for the other bones. So I select this bone and I'm going to scale it a little bit over here and Control Shift S and scale it over here. Okay, so I'm going to select this object and select the armature, Control P, parent with empty groups. Now to move this object we only need the car vertex group, so I'm going to delete the other ones and again go to edit mode on the object, select everything and assign. Now before start applying the armature or assigning bones to the claw object, let's think a little bit on how it works. This bone should follow this one in the same position, right? So what I'm gonna do is go to edit mode and instead of this bone being parented to this claw arm down, I'm going to go to the bone properties and I'm going to delete this parent and instead select the claw shaft. This way, when I move this claw shaft up and down, this bone is going to follow it at the same position. So now what we need is when I move this little bone here, which I call it claw arm IK, move also the other arm. In order to achieve that, we have to create an inverse kinematic constraint. So with this bone selected, I'm going to bone constraints and I'm going to create or add a inverse kinematic constraint. So the target is obviously the armature, and the bone that it's going to move this bone is the claw arm IK. Now if I move up this claw shaft, everything is going real crazy, and that's because, let me press Ctrl C, we have here the chain length, and this is telling you how many bones are moving this little one. So with this bone we are going to move the bone itself plus the claw arm down. So actually we need here in the chain length 2 bones. That way when I move the claw shaft up and down, Now we are rotating properly these arms. Another thing we can do, if you can see here, if I go up, this is going crazy and unrealistic, and if I go down, it's going to disconnect this bone. So what we can do is limit this location or this movement. In order to achieve that, I'm going to the bone constraint again and add a limit location. So we are going to limit the location in the y-axis and in the local space. And another important aspect we have to check is here in item, we need to lock the transforms that we don't need. So for example, here I'm going to change this to XYZ Euler. So this piece, this shaft, is not going to rotate, never. So I'm going to lock these transforms, and also it's not going to move in the Z or X axis, as you can see here in the axis of the bone. So I'm going to lock the Z and the X axis. So now if I press G, I can only move this bone up and down, and I can't rotate it either. So back again in the limit location, I'm going to the right view and I'm going to increase this value. So finally, something like these values seems to work. If I go up, this stops here, and if I go down, stops over here. If you move it some bone and you have to go to the original position, just select everything and press Alt G to move it to the original position, and Alt R in case you have rotated some bone. So now we have this rig down for this leg. We need these other two legs, and what I can do is duplicate them and rotate it to match the same position. So as we have the 3D cursor here, if you don't have it, you can go to edit mode and select, for example, this end point here, Shift S cursor to select it, and now I'm going in edit mode. I'm going to select these 3 bones and press Shift and D and rotate in Z axis. And obviously, let me press Ctrl C. Obviously, we want to move from the 3D cursor. So again, Shift and D and rotate in Z axis, in this case 120 degrees, and immediately now Shift R to perform the same operation. So now we have the 3 legs, and if we move this bone, we are going to move these 3 legs at the same way. So now it's time to attach the object to this armature. So as before, I'm going to select the object. Let me go to solid mode now and select the armature, Ctrl P, and parent with empty groups. I'm going to select this object now and take a look at the vertex groups. I'm going to clean up a little bit because, for example, we don't need the root main, moving bars, car. We just only need the claw bones. So now, for example, let's see this object here. We have different elements. This element is going to be attached to the claw root. Now let me see if it's better if we go to the armature, and in viewport display we show in front. There we go. So now in edit mode here, I'm going to select this element with L and attach it to claw root. So select the vertex group of claw root and assign. Obviously these little pieces are attached to this element, so I'm going to select these little pieces here, and this one as well, and this will go attached, and this will go with the claw root, so assign. Now these 2 pieces are attached to the claw arm up, so I select them, go to the claw arm up, in this case vertex group, and assign. And now these 2 parts over here, and these as well, and these 2 pieces, these are attached to the claw arm down, so select the claw arm down and assign. And finally this piece over here, it's attached to the claw arm up, so select the claw arm up and assign. Let's check real quick what we are doing. So I'm going to right view, select this bone in pose mode, and it looks right. Let's attach the shaft. So I select here this element and these 2 elements as well, this one, and these 2 little pieces, and attach it to the claw shaft. So go to the claw shaft and assign. Now we should have one of these legs already rigged. And now we just need to do the same for the other legs. So once we are done assigning the vertex groups to each little piece of this component, we should have this kind of movement, and that's how it works. And now one thing we can do to optimize a little bit this rig is to limit the transform of these different bones here in item. So for example, this claw root can rotate this way, not in the 3D cursor, but the box, okay. It can rotate this way, but it can't move to the sides. So it only moves down, right? And this is the y-axis of the bone. So I'm going to limit the location only in y-axis and the rotation x, y, z, Euler and locked. For example, this car can move in x and z axis and it can't rotate. So I'm going to disable the rotation in x, y, z and only enable x and z. So just lock the y-axis. For the moving bars, they cannot move in this side, so I'm going to lock the z-axis as well as the y-axis. They cannot move up, so now they only move in the x-axis, and also lock the rotation in all its axes. Another thing we can do to automate this movement of the car with these moving bars is to make another bone to control the two bones at the same time. So in edit mode, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to place another bone here at the middle. So I'm going to press Shift and D and move it up a little bit, okay? And I'm going to call this bone car, for example, car driver, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger with Ctrl Alt S over here. And now let's check the parenting of these bones. So this bone is parented to the moving bars, which is not the best case. What I'm going to do is go to edit mode of the armature, delete the parent, and actually I want the parent to be the root main. So go over here and search for root main. There we go. Now what we want is the car copy the location of this car driver, but only in the Z and X axis, and these moving bars is going to copy the location of this car driver, but only in the X axis. So what we need to do is select this moving bars bone and go to bone constraints and add a copy location constraint. I'm going to copy the target is the armature and the bone is the car driver. I'm going to change the target and the owner to local space, and I want to copy only on the x-axis. So when I move this car driver, the moving bars are moving in the x-axis. I'm going to make the same for the car. I'm going to add a copy location. The target is the armature and the bone is the car driver. Change it to local space, and I want only to copy in the X. Let me see the axis. Yeah, this is the Z and the X axis. So the Y axis, I don't need it. Now if I move this car driver, I'm going to move the car and the moving bars. As you can see, this car bone is copying the location of the car driver plus the location of the moving bars, and this is because we set the car to be parented with the moving bars. So I'm going to go to the original position with Alt G, Alt R and Alt S, and in edit mode I'm going to select the car bone, and here in bone properties I'm going to delete the parent of the moving bars. So I'm going to set the parent to the car driver in this case. So now it's everything connected. The same for the moving bars. I'm going to set the parent to the root main. And now if I go to pose mode, I can move this car driver to any position and it will be accurate in terms of mechanical rigging. And now as you can see, we need here also the cable on the armature. So let's do it. To rig these kind of cables, this is actually a path, a NURBS path. If we go to edit mode, we can edit this curve. We need a bone for each of these control points of the path. So let's go to the Armature, to the edit mode. I'm going to go to the right view, and since we have this claw root bone already in the center of this cable, I'm going to duplicate this bone, move it in the Z axis right over here, so the parent is the same as the claw root. I'm going to scale it a little bit, and with Ctrl Alt S I squish it a little bit over here, and I'm going to move it right there. So in order to parent each of these control points, we need to place a hook modifier. Before I start doing this, I'm going to press Shift S and cursor to selected to center the 3D cursor at this point, and select this bone, and Shift S cursor to selected. Shift S selection to cursor. So we have now this bone here. I'm going to move it, and something over here. It should work. Now I'm going to rename this bone to cable 01. Now I'm going to press Shift and D and parent this one to the previous cable, and parent this cable bone to the previous one. So I delete this parent here in the bone properties and select cable 01. I'm going to rename this as cable 02, and as we did with the previous one, I'm going to select the curve and go to edit mode, select this control point, Shift S, cursor to selected, and now this bone should be in this position. So I select this bone, Shift S, and selection to cursor. And now let's do the same for the other two bones. So once we have these 4 bones, each for one control point of this curve, I'm going to go to modifiers of the curve and add a hook modifier. The object will be the armature. So if I can select here the armature, this first one is going to be the cable 1. Once that I'm here, I'm going to duplicate this modifier and select here cable 2, duplicate again, cable 3, and duplicate again, and cable 4. So now let's select, for example, this first point. It's going to be parented to the cable 01 bone. So click assign. Notice that I'm in edit mode of the curve. Select the second control point, assign to the cable 02, and the same for the other. Assign and cable 04 assign. So now if I go to the pose mode of this cable, let's enable also the X location. Okay, so as you can see, we are moving these control points with these bones. So now we need to attach this last cable bone to the claw root. So let's select this cable 04, go to the relations, and instead of cable 03, this is going to be claw root. So now if I go to pose mode and select this claw root and I move it down, the cable is going to go with the claw. And I can even pose the cable if we go more stylized. For example, I unlock the rotation and location, and I can move it there, maybe rotate it like this, and select this other cable and move it like that. Let's select everything, Alt G, Alt R, and Alt S to bring it to the original position, and return this as it was. So I lock the rotation and the Z and X axis. Alright, so now the basic rig is done, and we could start making some keyframes and moving this claw. I can see here the static bars not attached. So if I move the root, it's not moving. So I'm going to select these static bars, Shift, select the armature, Control P, empty groups. I'm going to the static bar vertex groups now, and I'm basically going to delete everything instead of the root main bone or vertex group. So now I select everything and assign to the root main vertex group. There we go. So now we could start making some keyframes. If we take a look here, we actually only need this car driver to move this entire thing. We only need this claw root to move up and down the actual claw, and later we only need this claw shaft to close or open these arms. So what we can do is apply some custom shapes to these bones and move the other bones to another layer and have a cleaner viewport. So here, as you can see, we have another collection with custom shapes. We have an arrow, a circle or a sphere, and these kind of arrows to move around. So what we can do is go here to, for example, the car driver. I want to have this custom shape. So I'm going to the bone properties, and in viewport display, here we have the custom shape object, and in viewport display here we have the custom object option. I select it over here with this little tool. So now, as you can see, the shape of the bone has changed, and I can go here and make it a little bit more bigger to see it better. And this is like the previous bone, but with the shape. It's more cleaner and more easier to remember what does each bone. I'm going to select this sphere to move up and down the claw root. So I select this claw root, go to custom shape and select this sphere. And we can make it small again over here. Okay. If we want to change the position, we can go to the actual sphere, and if I go to edit mode and select everything, I can move it around the y-axis, and it translates here to move it up and down. So if I'm in edit mode, I press G and Y, and I can move it a little bit down over here. And last, we want to change the claw shaft custom shape. So I'm going to select the claw shaft and select this arrow custom shape. We can make it smaller, something like that. I'm going to disable this collection, and now I can select the arrow, this little sphere, and these arrows, and go to the Armature properties. And as you can see, we have here the layers. I'm going to press Ctrl Y to select all the other bones, and press M to move it, for example, to this layer. As you can see, we have now this layer and this one. So in this layer, now we have just these three elements to move this entire rig. So in this way, it's really easy to move around the rig. For example, I can select this shape and move it over here, select here, move it down, and select the arrows and move it down or up. And that's basically everything for this claw system. And now let's play some keyframes to have a little animation. So I'm going to select this car driver, enable auto keyframes here in the timeline. I'm gonna set the first keyframe. So I press I and insert location keyframe, and for example in the frame 20 is going to be over here. So let's see what we have. Okay, it's going to stay at this position some time, so I'm going to duplicate these keyframes to something over here. And then in the frame 40, for example, it's going to be right over here. Let's play this. Okay, a little bit more slower, for example here. Then it remains again in this position a little bit. So I duplicate these keyframes. And then in the frame 65, for example, it's going to be right here. Let's play this. Okay, and finally frame 80 is going to be over here. So let's play this and see how it works. I think this movement is really fast, so I'm gonna select these keyframes and move it a little bit farther on the timeline, so we will have a slower movement. Okay, I want to start a little bit later, so I'm going to select all these keyframes and start, for example, at keyframe 10. There we go. And it will be more realistic if the claw, when it stops, rotates a little bit due to the weight of the claw. And to do that, I found a really nice and useful add-on, and it's called Wiggle Bones. You can find it here at Blender Artists. I'm gonna leave the link in the description. And you can install it as you do with any other add-on. So once you have it enabled, you can go here, and you can see in the Armature tab we have this new option here, and it says wiggle armature. So now we have the claw root, and if I go to the bone properties, I can enable here wiggle bone. So now this bone is going to react to the physics. Here you have different options for stiffness, dampening, stretching, gravity, and it's just a matter of adjust these values to have something realistic depending on the kind of movement you want to achieve. For example, now we have this movement. Maybe it seems that it weights too much, so what I can do is, for example, increase the stiffness, maybe 0.7, and also I'm going to increase the amplitude rotation, something like 80. If we go now and play this animation, we have this nice behavior of the claw. Then we have here some utilities. For example, if you go back to the timeline, you can see this wiggle bone is going a little bit crazy, so you can reset physics state, and sometimes it works, but the best you can do is go to the start, reset physics, and you will have it working again. Once you are happy with the movement and the animation, make sure you have your animation and your movements really clear before bake the wiggle bone, because otherwise you will have here plenty of keyframes to this bone, and it will be really difficult to make some adjustment on this. So the best for this situation is to have it disabled, plan all the movement. For example, here we want to go down now, so I'm going to select this claw root, insert a initial location keyframe, and in the frame, for example 105 it will be, and for the arms it stays in this position, and in the frame 110 it goes down like this. Let's see what we have. So it goes like that, and now go down and close. So now I can go to the first frame, select the claw root, enable the wiggle bone, and now if I press play, we will have this nice animation. And you can obviously bake this wiggle effect and it will be applied. And that's all. In case you find it useful and want to explore a little bit more on this rig, I'm sharing a free blend file on my Gumroad, so feel free to download it and take a look on it, as well as some other products I have over there. Thanks for watching, take care and have fun!